Shalom, shalom. My name is Barney de Klerk. I should say Hak Shavuot Samayach as well. I wish you a blessed Feast of Weeks or Pentecost Shavuot in the year 5785 on the Hebrew calendar. Shavuot or Pentecost or the Feast of Weeks. We read about it in the Torah, Exodus 19 and 20. And in Deuteronomy 15 and 16 as well. And of course, it's customary to read the book of Ruth, and I'm going to talk about that a lot. And Psalm 67, which I'm not going to talk on, and from the Gospel, the book of Acts, chapter 2, and I will touch on that as well. My name is Barney de Klerk. I'm making this video not because I'm a teacher, I'm a student, and I love sharing what I'm learning. So let's look at this Moadim or Moad, appointed time of Adonai. We're not told in the Bible the actual date on which Shavuot must be celebrated, but we're told in Deuteronomy 16 verse 1 to keep the Passover of Adonai on the full moon of the first month, the month of Aviv. Aviv means spring. In Leviticus 23 verse 15 to 22, and again in Deuteronomy 16 verse 9 to 11, we are told to count 7 weeks from the weekly Shabbat on the Passover, or in the Feast of Unleavened Bread, actually, plus one more day, 7 weeks plus 1 day. Or alternatively, to count the days, to count 50 days from the Shabbat after the feast of, or during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, and up to 50. And when we get to 50, that is Shavuot. In Greek, the 50th day is called Pentecost, 50th day, and we celebrate it. The number 50 has some significance that I want to point out first. We know in the week after the 7th day, the Shabbat, the 8th day represents the beginning of a new week. It's a new start. After the 7th year, which is the 7th year is a sabbatical year or a Shemitah, the slaves are freed and the soil is rested for a season and ready for a fresh start in the 8th year again. So then after 7 sevenths of years, 7 times 7 years, that's after 49 years, plus instead of plus 1 day, plus 1 year, that makes the 50th year the Jubilee. And under Torah law, ownership of the land reverts back to the original owners in the Jubilee. Just as the 8th day and the 8th year represents a new beginning, the Jubilee is an 8th on steroids. It really is a new beginning in all sorts of measures. And Shavuot is a feast of significant meaning because it comes 50 days after the Pesach, after the Shabbat, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread. And it is all about renewal, all about new beginnings. Remember how the Passover is celebrated with matzah, with unleavened bread. Well, Shavuot is the opposite. Shavuot is celebrated with oodles of chametz in the bread. And you can read that Leviticus 23 verse 17. During the Feast of Unleavened Bread, chametz represents sin. But in Shavuot, chametz represents the fatness of the harvest. It represents Adonai's blessing. The Hebrew word dayenu, which means more than enough, or as David put it in the Psalms, my cup runneth over. It is abundance. In Exodus 19 verse 9 to 11, we learn that Adonai veiled himself in a thick cloud to speak to Moses in front of the entire nation of Israel, to tell them that they must listen to Moses. This means to pay attention to all the Torah commandments. Some 3,000 years after Moses, Adonai said similar things at Yeshua's baptism in the Jordan River And he also said the same thing to a small intimate audience of Yeshua's on top of the Mount of Transfiguration. What he said is, "This is my son, listen to him, listen to him." We can therefore see that Moses is a forerunner of the Messiah, a prototype of the Messiah. Moses wrote down the law as Adonai dictated it to him, and of course Yeshua, I believe, is the one who dictated the law to Moses, and he came to uphold the law. He fulfilled the law, he did not cancel it. He said the law will endure until heaven and earth passes away first. So he came to uphold the law. Don't listen to liars who tell you the law's been done away with. They are preparing the way for the man of lawlessness, the man of Torahlessness, whom we also know as the Antichrist. Let's look at the significance of Shavuot, or Pentecost, if you like. All the men of Israel had to appear before Adonai on Shavuot. That instruction is in Exodus 23 verse 14 to 17. The same instruction also applies to the Passover and to Sukkot. Those three feasts are the great festivals where all the men had to appear before Adonai. Each one of these three great festivals also have a corresponding first fruits celebration. In the Passover we have first fruits as part of the greater Passover celebration. It celebrates the first fruits of the barley harvest. Then at Shavuot we have first fruits, but this time it's the first fruits of the wheat harvest. And then at Sukkot there's a first fruit celebration again. That time it's the first fruits of the summer fruits. Adonai gave Moses and all Israel 3 days to prepare themselves before they could meet him. We understand Exodus 19 verse 10 and 19 verse 15 to 16 that Adonai spoke to Moses on the Shabbat, and that he then came to Israel on the third day. Third day means Tuesday in our terms. He came on a Tuesday. In Exodus 19 verse 18 to 20 we read how Mount Sinai burned in Adonai's holy presence. Shofar sounds preceded him, and then Adonai gave the 10 commandments to Moses. The 10 commandments and the Torah is the ketubah, the wedding contract between Adonai and his bride Israel. Remember, Adonai's bride is Israel. It's not the church. That is a false teaching. It's called replacement theology. Israel is the bride. Gentile believers have a hope to become part of the bride by being adopted into the family tree of Abraham, or grafted in, as Paul puts it in Romans 11. All Israel heard Adonai speaking to Moses. He was actually speaking to the entire nation. But they, in fear and depredation, they requested for Adonai to only speak to Moses. And they said they will listen to Moses. And you can read that in Exodus 20, verse 18 and 19. These events happened on Shavuot. Shavuot, therefore, even in our day, is Adonai's wedding anniversary to Israel. It's a wedding anniversary. In Shemot Rabbah, which is Hebrew for Great Exodus, records in 5.9 that on the occasion of giving the Torah, the children of Israel not only heard the Lord's voice, but they actually saw the sound waves as they emerged from the Lord's mouth. They visualized them as fiery substances. Each commandment that left the Lord's mouth traveled around the entire camp and then came back to every Jew individually. That must be every Israelite individually. It goes on to record that Rabbi Yochanan was saying that God's voice, as it was uttered, it split into 70 voices. Remember, 70 is the number of nations in the world. And split into 70 voices, into 70 languages, so that all the nations of the earth could understand what Adonai was saying. When we look at Genesis 11 verse 7, the number 70 in scripture is associated with the nations. So the Torah was made available to the nations. What it means, remember at the Tower of Babel, Adonai locked the scriptures away from the Gentiles. They could not access it because Adonai divided the languages. Here at Shavuot, we see a reversal of what happened at the Tower of Babel. At Shavuot, Adonai unlocks the scriptures again so that the Gentiles can also get to know the God of Israel. You'll see in a minute that the parallel with the Acts of the Apostles chapter 2 as well. Soon after the time when Moses accepted Adonai's ketubah and presented it to the nation in Exodus 24 verse 7, Israel pressed Aaron into making a golden calf as an image of Adonai, and so doing they broke the wedding vows. In Exodus 32 verse 1 to 8 you can read about it. In the wake of their breaking the marriage vows, the wedding vows, 3,000 worshippers of the golden calf were slain, and that's written in Exodus 32 verse 28. And remember that number, 3,000 were slain. In Deuteronomy 15 verse 19 to 23 we read that the firstborn from the womb belongs to Adonai. And this is an instruction, a passage from which we deduct that the women have higher spiritual value than men. Men have higher physical value. That's why the firstborn of the father inherits a double portion, but the firstborn of the mother, first out of the womb, belongs to Adonai. And regarding animals, those animals had to be sacrificed as a celebratory meal sacrifice or a shalom sacrifice. If they are perfect, if they're not perfect, or if they are in an animal species such as a donkey, which is not kosher and not suitable to be sacrificed, then they have to be redeemed or killed by breaking their necks. Exodus 13 verse 13 to 16. The sacrifices are to celebrate the marriage supper of the Lamb in prophetic terms. That's the purpose. Remember, the shalom offerings, the meal offerings, is people bring a sacrifice, they eat it, they enjoy it in the presence of Adonai, sharing the meal with the priest. And this is what was happening with first from the womb animals. They were slaughtered for sacrifice and then enjoyed as a meal in the marriage supper of the Lamb. You can read confirmation of what I'm saying in Isaiah 25 verse 6 to 9, and Isaiah 61 verse 10, and Hosea 2 verse 19 to 20, and in Psalm 45, and in Matthew 22 verse 1 to 14, and in Matthew 25 verse 1 to 46, and in the Gospel according to John chapter 14 verse 3, and in the book of Revelation chapter 19 verse 1 to 21. All of that would confirm to you that these sacrifices were celebrating the wedding feast, the marriage of the Lamb, the marriage of Adonai to Israel. In the book of Acts, in the Brit Hadashah, the New Testament, in chapter 1 verse 8, we read that Yeshua promised the power of the Holy Spirit. And then in the book of Acts chapter 2 verse 1, 2, 3 and 4, we read how he delivered on his promise. The Holy Spirit were poured out. The disciples were together in Jerusalem when a mighty wind brought tongues of flames that were divided and settled on each one of them. It was a repeat of what the rabbinical literature says happened at Mount Sinai, at Shavuot, when Israel received Adonai's ketubah, the marriage contract. So that Shavuot then became the second reversal or teshuvah of what happened at the Tower of Babel. It's a confirmation. The final reversal of what happened at the Tower of Babel is still ahead of us, partially fulfilled. In Zephaniah 3 verse 9, we read that Adonai promised to restore a pure language to his people. And remember, the Bible always says first for the Jew, but thereafter also for the Gentile believer. So this promise from Zephaniah 3.9, the restoration of a pure language, that has been fulfilled to the Jews. Hebrew as a long dead language have been revived and is the official language of Israel, and it's a beautiful, rich language. But the second step of the restoration of a pure language to the Gentile believers in the God of Israel, that still has to happen. It's going to happen to Gentiles who walk in Aderech Yeshua. The Holy Spirit gave each disciple the blessing to speak other human languages, equipping them and empowering them to take the gospel message to the corners of the known world. In a hard-hitting speech, Peter quoted the prophet Joel, chapter 3, verse 1 to 5, and also verse 20. And please read that for yourself. And Shavuot is a harvest festival like Sukkot, and therefore what the prophet Joel also wrote about Sukkot in chapter 4 gives us further insight as well. But regarding Sukkot, Shavuot, the grain festival, we should also read Isaiah 63 verse 1, 2 and 3, and the book of Revelation chapter 14 verse 17 up to 20, and the book of Revelation chapter 19 verse 11 to 16. And two of the Psalms as well. Peter quoted these Psalms. He quoted Psalm 16 verse 1 to 11 in his speech, and then he quoted the first verse from Psalm 110. It contains King David's recognition of Yeshua as Messiah. So at the end of the speech of Peter, 3,000 people came to faith in the Jewish Messiah, in Yeshua. And these people restored the 3,000 worshippers of the golden calf that was slain in Exodus 32 verse 28. So what was lost is now restored at Shavuot. With regards to the Shavuot grain harvest, the wheat and the tares were allowed to grow together, but at Shavuot, the wheat is harvested into the barn and the tares go to the eternal fire. As I said, it's customary to read the book of Ruth on Shavuot. I'll quickly point a few things out to you. Before we read the book of Ruth, in order to understand the book, we need to understand Torah of redemption from Leviticus 25, verse 32 to 55. We need to understand the Shemitah, the sabbatical year, and the Jubilee from Leviticus 25, verse 4, verse 10, verse 23. We need to understand the Torah regarding inheritance from the book of Numbers, chapter 27, verse 8 to 11. And we need to understand the Torah regarding Yibum, the levirate marriage, and that is from Deuteronomy 25 verse 5 to 10. And we need to understand the Torah regarding harvesting and gleaning, and you can read that in Leviticus 19 verse 9 to 10, chapter 23 verse 22, and in Deuteronomy 24 verse 19. And lastly, we also need to grasp the Torah against assimilation. That's from Exodus 34 verse 12 and Deuteronomy 7 verse 1 to 6 and Deuteronomy 14 verse 2. I rattle off these verses. If you're not familiar with it, then maybe rewind, pause, take note and look at those verses in the Bible, because it gives you the background to understand the book of Ruth. But a brief historical background of Ruth is as follows. During the time of the Judges, that's when the history of Ruth played out. Remember the judges after Israel returned to the promised land, but before the kings. In that time of the judges, Elimelech, his name means my Elohim is king, God is king, and his wife Naomi, Naomi means pleasantness, and they were from the tribe of Ephraim. Ephraim means fruitful, and they lived in Bethlehem. Bethlehem is Bethlehem in English, means the house of bread. But they moved from Israel to Moab. Moab means from his father, and it's referring to Lot, who fathered a son, Moab, with his daughter. So Elimelech and Naomi, they moved because of a famine from an extended drought. So you can see here people from the tribe of Ephraim, which means fruitful, who lived in the house of bread. They had no bread and they were not fruitful, so they moved from Israel to Moab. At this time, Israel's blessings came, the time of the judges, that is, the blessings over Israel was a bit like a yo-yo, because Israel's adherence to Adonai's law were like that, up and down, up and down. At the time, they were far from serving Adonai, so Ephraim failed to be fruitful, and the house of bread failed to deliver bread. With Elimelech and Naomi went their two sons, Machlon and Chilion. Machlon's name means sickness or weakness, and Chilion means perfect or complete. The two boys obviously were opposites from one another. Maybe Machlon was a croup baby and Chilion was an athlete. But in spite of his name, Elimelech, when they arrived in Moab, he died. And because you cannot escape your punishment, and even his name testifies against him. A friend of mine used to say that no matter where you go, there you are. And that's what happened to Elimelech. He did not live within the requirements of Adonai, according to Adonai's will. So no matter where he went, there he was. Adonai found him, he died. The widow Naomi then broke the 54th negative commandment in the Bible from Deuteronomy 23, verse 4 and 5. By allowing her sons to marry Moabite women. That commandment was, you shall not marry Moabites. Naomi later remembered the Torah laws, but when it came to her beloved boys, she supported them in whatever they pursued, even against the Torah. Deuteronomy 23 verse 4 states that no Moabite will enter into the community of Adonai, not even after 10 generations, the Bible says. And this creates a problem that we will explore later on. It creates a problem regarding David, King David of Israel. I'll explain. No less than 10 years after Naomi and two boys settled in Moab, both Machlon and Chilion died. The strong one died as the weak one died. When you are outside of Adonai's will, then your personal strength and effort cannot save you. We don't know how long the boys were married, but both of them died childless. Their wives was barren, effectively no children when the husbands died. And then Naomi decided to return to make a teshuvah to Bethlehem, the house of bread. I hope you can see a parallel here to the parable of the prodigal son. That Naomi went to Moab, she found no joy there. 10 years later, she returned to her father's house in Bethlehem. It is, in essence, the story of the prodigal, but in real history, early history. Naomi turned to her two daughters-in-law who failed to bear children, and she turned them away. Naomi was broken. Orpah, the one daughter-in-law, name means a female deer, but Orpah also has the root of the back. So Naomi saw the back of her. After she sent her away, Orpah left, and she saw only the back of Orpah. But Ruth, and the name Ruth means compassionate friend. Ruth remained true to her name, and she stuck to Naomi like glue. Or if you like, she stuck like Velcro to Naomi. Naomi changed her own name to Mara. Mara means bitter. And she blamed El Shaddai for her mystery. El Shaddai is God my provider. The text records only Shaddai, but it means El Shaddai. She blamed him. She said he failed to provide for her, and that's why she left. She initially came to Moab with a full tank, but she is returning empty. However, the name Mara did not stick to her. She's in the rest of the book, she's still addressed as Naomi. Naomi and Ruth arrived in Bethlehem just after Pesach, in the time to count the owner up to the barley harvest, while the wheat was still ripening in the fields. Remember, barley and wheat planted in the same time, they are winter crops. The grain grows during the winter rainy season, but the barley ripens before the wheat. The barley ripens, the first fruits during the Passover Pesach is from the barley, and at Shavuot, 50 days later, the first fruits is from the wheat. Ruth went to glean barley in a prominent family member Boaz's barley fields. Boaz was a godly man and inquired about the stranger in his fields, and he had compassion for her. Boaz acknowledged Ruth's good qualities and her reputation that he heard about. Ruth said that Boaz treated her as a maidservant, even though she was not one, but in her own words, of lower standing. Boaz, it's interesting to see that Boaz never employed her. She never became a maidservant. Even when Boaz said that she can follow his employees to glean behind them and even between them, he never employed her. So there's a question, why would that be? And I'm not giving an answer to that question, I'm asking the question. Ruth stayed with Boaz's female employees until both the barley and the wheat harvests were completed. In other words, she stayed there until Shavuot. At one time, Boaz offered to share a communion meal with Ruth, bread dipped in the sop. It's a foreplay of the Last Supper that we read about in the Brit Hadashah. It may have been the second Passover at the time. I don't know. The second Passover is 1 month, one full moon after the Passover full moon. If for people who were not pure to celebrate the Passover at the time, second Passover is the catch-all. Boaz offered her roasted grain too, that's roasted barley, as a second course. She gleaned all day long and gathered 10 omers or 1 ephah of barley. That's about 48 pounds or 22 kilograms of barley for the day. When Naomi saw it, she blessed Boaz in the name of Adonai, who blessed both the living and the dead. Now there's an interesting name to explore for God. Adonai, who blessed both the living and the dead. In Hebrew, it is Chasdo et ha-chayim va et ha-metim. The et here is initially used as in the secondary meaning as the one and only unique thing, but I suspect the primary meaning of et is also hidden within. Let me explain that. In the opening verse of the Bible, Genesis 1 verse 1, we read that the God of creation, the God who created it all, is Elohim Et. And the translators ignore the et. They say it's untranslatable. So we don't know who the creator God is, but his name is there in Hebrew, in the Hebrew text, Elohim et. And later on in Isaiah 44 verse 6, we get a glimpse of who Adonai et is, because he speaks to Elijah. He says, I am the Alpha and the Tav, I am the beginning and the end. And then the revelation comes in the book of Revelation about the identity of Elohim et, or Adonai et, who is et, the Aleph Tav. But in Revelation it's also hidden in Greek again, masked in Greek, called the Alpha and the Omega. It is none other than Yeshua Mashiach, Yeshua the Messiah. He is the beginning and the end, the Alpha and the Omega, the Aleph and the Tav. And that is the primary meaning of et, the God of creation. The secondary meaning is the one and only unique thing. Now here we see Naomi praised Adonai, who blessed both the living and the dead. In English, that's simple, but if you remember what I read in Hebrew, chasdo, that means chesed, chasdo, et ha-chaim. Now, ha-chaim is already the living, because chai is life in single, and chaim is life in the plural form. Ha-chaim means the living, and here the text says et ha-chaim, which means there's a et there, it looks like tautology. It's chesed to the living, and then we see it again to the dead. Va et ha metim, also for the dead. And mut is the singular for death in Hebrew. Mutim means death in plural. So who are we talking about here? Why the tautology? Who is the et of the living and the et of the dead? Ha-chaim, from chai, as I said, chai is life, chaim, life in plural. The plural refers to abundant life. It's first mentioned in the Bible. Remember the use of first mention. Each time a word's mentioned for the first time in the Bible, it colors the meaning of that word for the rest of the Bible. So Chaim, the first time Chai is mentioned, is in the book of Genesis, chapter 1, verse 20. And that is with reference to Adonai's creation to bring the waters to swarm, to teem with life. That was Chaim, life in the plural. So Naomi may have prophesied over Ruth that although she was barren, she would swarm with life. Later, Ruth had only one child, and I have to point out the parallel with Sarah, Abram's wife. Adonai promised that their children will be like the stars in the heaven, yet Sarah had only one son. We see exactly the parallel with Ruth here. She had only one son, yet she carried this promise of abundant life. So Chaim has a greater meaning than just the direct next generation. Ultimately, from Ruth's line came the Messiah, came King David, and eventually the Messiah. So Chaim, life abundantly, is a prophecy about the Messiah who will come, who will eventually be born from Ruth's descendants. In him and him alone, Chaim, there is Chaim for everyone who believes in him, life abundantly. And then we ask, who's et, Aleph Tav, of the dead? Ha-metim, Mut, as I said, is a dead person. Metim is the plural form of death. The first time that is used in the Bible is in Genesis 2, verse 17, when Elohim warned Adam that if he ate the forbidden fruit, he will surely die. In a way, Naomi refers then to all the children of Adam who will surely die, but also specifically to her deceased husband and her sons who ate the forbidden fruits of Moab, but she also prophesied about the chesed of a levirate marriage of barren Ruth like dead Ruth, because she was as good as dead, no children, who would eventually bear the Messiah. So from death comes life through chesed, through grace. Chesed is very often translated as loving kindness, or alternatively as grace. I guess that it may be because Boaz never offered employment to Ruth that Naomi decided that seduction will ensure sustenance long after the harvesting season is over. So bathing and perfuming was back then as much the tools of seduction as it is now in our time. Naomi told Ruth to bath and to perfume herself. And she knew that the influence of a wee wine after supper will cause a mellowness in Boaz and would invite him to sleep. And she sent Ruth to Boaz. So this happened at the time the harvest itself was finished of the barley. The grain were allowed to rest for a while so that they would dry out, so that the husk and the kernel could be separated easily, and so that no mold will destroy the harvest. And then they were winnowing, cleaning the grain before it's turned into flour. Well, at the winnowing floor, Boaz was sleeping, and the bathed and perfumed Ruth went to lie down at his feet. This was not a sexual seduction. It was merely a reminder of him of some family duties, and we'll get to that. When Boaz woke up, he said, "Who's this woman sleeping at my feet?" She identified herself as Ruth, his handmaid. Yet she was not employed by him, so she was not his handmaid. She asked him to spread the corner of her garment over her. Now, that may be against the nightshell in a simple, direct meaning, but it reminds us immediately of Malachi's prophecy that there will be healing in the corners of the Messiah's garment. And the corners are also called wings. And Yeshua himself said that he longed to cover Jerusalem in his wings as a mother hen would cover her chicks. That time will surely come during his millennial reign, and that is for sure. But Ruth's words reminds us of that. Our prayers for the peace of Jerusalem will be answered when Yeshua established his millennial reign. What Ruth asked Boaz for is chesed, some loving kindness, because he was Naomi and her Goel. He was their kinsman redeemer. So the next day, after a few nervous moments, Boaz did indeed become Ruth's Goel, and he also married her. So Naomi's seductive plan worked. Boaz and Ruth received some really strange blessings on their wedding. Let me share that with you. The first blessing was, "May Adonai make this woman like Rachel and Leah." Like two women who couldn't stand each other, who were constantly in competition with each other. What type of blessing is that? But the order they are mentioned is important. Rachel was barren initially, like Ruth was initially. But Leah was fertile, and Ruth would become fertile. She would bore a son. the blessing was for her futility. Rachel was initially very sexy, but she was godless. Leah, on the other hand, had an inner beauty and she served Adonai. Ruth came from Moab, so she was the sexy, godless one, but she converted to Judaism. She became to believe in the one true God of Israel. She transferred in more ways than one from Rachel to Leah. The second blessing on the wedding was, may you prosper in Ephraim, the region, and be renowned in Bethlehem, the town. This blessing was repeated centuries later in Micah 5 verse 2, and it was ultimately fulfilled in Yeshua to the blessing of over Bethlehem Ephrata, the town and the region. And of course, Yeshua is from the genetic line of Ruth and Boaz. The third blessing they received on their wedding was, may your house be like the house of Perez. Perez was one of Boaz's ancestors. The line is given at the end of the book of Ruth. Perez was born after Tamar seduced Judah. And Tamar had only one son, Perez. The story in short is Judah's wife passed away. Judah's first son married Tamar. They didn't have children. The son died. Then the second son married Tamar. They didn't have children and the son died. And then he would not give Tamar to his third son as a wife. And Tamar then disguised herself as a prostitute, and Judah went and slept with her and made her pregnant, and Perez was born from that. So in the second part of this blessing, the people were saying, actually, may you have only one child, like Perez, through the seed in singular that Adonai will give you by this woman. The blessing told Boaz, you will have only one child by this woman. And he never had another wife and another children as well, incidentally. So from their marriage, Obed was born. The woman blessed and prophesied over Naomi that Obed, who is the descendant, will be a renewer of life and a sustainer even in her old age. And note the messianic qualities of this prophecy: a renewer of life. Chaim, again, the plural, remember the wedding blessing, life in plural, and the sustainer, even in your old life. In this, Ruth is equated to the nation of Israel, and Obed is cast into the role of Adonai. The woman said that Ruth, as a daughter-in-law, was better than 7 sons. I tend to agree. So the obvious Shavuot link between the book of Ruth and Shavuot is the grain harvest. Naomi and Ruth is Israel, who went into diaspora and then returned to the land. Naomi is an Israelite. Ruth is a Gentile believer in the God of Israel. The two became as one stick, if I use Ezekiel's terminology, as a wife to Adonai. When we consider Ruth, her mother nation, Moab's gematria is 49. Remember, I spoke about 49 to 50, 7 sevens is 49. Gematria of Moab is 49, but Ruth took a step beyond. She stepped into her 50. She stepped into her Shavuot on the 50th day. And then she was made a new creature through her faith in the God of Israel. But let's talk about the elephant in the room. You know, because I said earlier, who the fly in the ointment is. And hopefully you can see it by now. From Deuteronomy 23 verse 4, we know that no Moabite can come into the community of Adonai for 10 generations. Yet David, who became the King David, is only the 4th generation from Ruth. So the question is, how can David come into the community of Adonai? How can David be considered to be an Israelite? The Jewish sages invented the reason that the ban of Moabites referred to men only and not to women, and especially women who converted. So that seems convenient, and it gets past the hurdle, I guess. In doing that, though, just note this: the rabbinical teaching acknowledged that in Bible times the lineage runs in the paternal line, from father to son to grandson, and so on. But then they themselves changed the lineage to run in the maternal line as it taught in modern Judaism. It makes no sense. And I think their reasoning does not hold water regarding David as well. I believe the key is in Boaz being a kinsman redeemer. In being a redeemer, he is a prototype of the Messiah, who is the redeemer, the salvation. Yeshua means salvation, of both Jew in the first place, but also Gentile thereafter. So Yeshua, or the Messiah, the Jewish Messiah, brings salvation to Naomi, the Jew, first, and then to Ruth, the Gentile. As a redeemer, Boaz redeemed Ruth of the multi-generational sin that cleaved to Moab. Just like Yeshua redeems us Gentiles from our multi-generational sin when we are grafted in or adopted into the family tree of Abraham. In many cases, in my case, my forefathers generations ago already bought into or got adopted into the family of Abraham through their faith. They got grafted onto the tree of Abraham. The principle is that we learn is that Chesed triumphs over the law. And that is how David came into the community of Adonai, by Chesed alone, through grace alone. As Yeshua said to the woman who was caught in adultery, go and sin no more, moving her from her sinful condition to salvation, to tzaddik, to make her righteous with instruction, sin no more. It's an instruction, biblical instruction to us to break with a godless family history and turn to Adonai. As I said, many of us already have the grace because our ancestors, forefathers already broke with godlessness or paganism several generations ago. Just as Ruth did, and just as the adulteress did as well. Because Ruth broke with paganism, with a non-faith of Moab, and she was redeemed by the Jewish Messiah, in inverted commas. Her grandchild in the 4th generation was welcomed into the community of Adonai, and he became the king of all Israel. So as we count the Omer, the food on our table changes from barley to wheat. Barley is generally considered as a poor man's food or animal feed, and wheat was processed into fine flour for the finest baked foods. So the quality of the bread changes from barley flour to wheat flour. This foreshadows what happened to the Messiah as well. Remember the two challas that's waved also at Shavuot as a symbol of gratefulness for the fatness of the harvest. The Messiah came twice, like the two challas. First as a barley loaf and then as a wheat loaf. The suffering servant first as the barley loaf, and the conqueror, King of Kings, the Messiah, son of David, as the finest flour of wheat. In both instances, the barley bread as well as the wheat bread, he is the bread of life. There's no condition. Without him, we have no life. And that, my friend, is what I learned about Shavuot. I hope that this feast will be meaningful to you, and I hope that God will bless you and keep you, that He will shine His face upon you and be gracious to you. I pray that He will lift His countenance, His provision upon you, as He did for Naomi and Ruth, and that He will give you shalom. Shalom, shalom.